Welcome everyone to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, John Harrington, back to hit you another video, and this evening we're going to be doing What If Naruto Was in High School DxD, Season 1, Part 3, the finale, as we will wrap up the remaining parts of Season 1 and close the book on the first part of the reboot. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been supportive of the rebooting of this series so far. Been getting amazing feedback and I am liking the results that are coming for it. Wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to reboot the series first. I wasn't sure if it would ever be as popular as it was originally, but I'm really liking the results and I'm really happy that I've gone through with this decision. So all in all, we're going to be going over part 3 of the What If story, and this is going to be a little extra longer than usual. Before we get into it, I do want to briefly explain some of Naruto's powers, just to try to get a full understanding of how they work. In the end, there was no real straight way that I could make Naruto as evened out, besides making him as overpowered as he could potentially be. So ultimately, the compromise that I came up with was to have Naruto only have a shadow clone be equal to a pawn piece. Essentially, the shadow clone is the split of Naruto's chakra in and of itself. So when Naruto makes one shadow clone, it's basically 50% of a Naruto anyway. His chakra being dispersed out evenly. That same would apply to the pawn pieces, which is why he can only make 7 more. On top of that, I did come up with the Naruto rules for the rating game ahead of time, and I do want to briefly share the rating game rules when it applies to a Naruto, just so that you can get the full understanding of how Naruto's powers would work. The first rule is that during a rating game, as you already know, Naruto's body is bound by the spell within the evil piece that is the pawn, so he can only make the 7 additional clones. Next, before you ask ahead of time, only the original Naruto can use the boosted gear. The boosted gear is not split amongst the other Narutos, simply because it is a sacred gear, and I believe that if you can't make a copy of a sacred gear before now, I'm not going to allow Naruto to do the same here. So only the original Naruto will have the boosted gear at any given time, whether that be rating game or non-rating game, just for future reference in the story. But Naruto does still split Kurama potentially amongst all of them, so keep that in mind as well when we go forward into the story. Next, each clone can be promoted to its own individual piece. So a clone can be promoted to a rook, a bishop, a queen, a knight, that sort of thing. However, each clone will have a limit. So for example, if a Naruto clone promotes itself to a rook, it has 8 minutes in the rook form and an 8-minute cool off period before it can promote to another piece. So keep that in mind when Naruto is in a rating game. This only applies to when Naruto is in a rating game, and it also applies to Naruto when he's actually in combat. This is just a natural order of things. This is just the way things are going to work, simply because if you have 8 Narutos who can promote themselves to queen and stay in there for a limitless amount of time, then that's a lot of power. So a Naruto clone can promote itself to queen, but it'll only last for 8 minutes, and then there's an 8-minute cooldown, so Naruto has to be careful when he uses his promotions. This is applied to the rating game as well as in his real life combat. So think of that as the cooldown period, similar to how the boosted gear has a cooldown period after it's reached its over booster. Also, when a Naruto clone is defeated during a rating game, the clone and its pawn piece is stored in another dimension along with the other defeated players, and there it shall remain until the end of the game. If Naruto, for example, loses 3 pawn pieces, he loses 3 clones that he cannot use until the game is over. After that, the clones effectively return back to his body as they are stored in another space. And all in all, these are the Naruto rules that I came up with the rating game and the pawn pieces. Again, was really only the best concept that I could come up with. All of these rules do not apply to Naruto when he's not in the rating game. However, the time limit for the clones when they use their promotions, that will apply whether he's in a rating game or not. And as far as Naruto having the boosted gear, only the original will have the boosted gear at any given time, but the others can be boosted by the boosted gear if Naruto wishes to transfer that power to a particular clone or distribute the power equally amongst the other clones. So keep that in mind as well when we go forward in the series. But other than that, that is the full rules for the Naruto rating game and what's going to be coming up in the series and in other portions of this what if going beyond that. I just wanted to try to make that clear, or as clear as I possibly can. But anyway, I'm not going to keep you waiting. I'm just going to show your Saturday evening video. What if Naruto was in high school DxD Season 1 Part 3, the finale. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Asuya's living arrangements would be made by Rias. Taking into consideration Asuya's feelings and who she wanted to live with, it would be decided that Asuya would be living with Naruto in his home. Naruto would be taken aback by this, wondering why Asuya would want to live with him of all people, not thinking that he would be the suitable of roommates. However, Asuya would be very adamant in wanting to live with Naruto, feeling indebted to him and being grateful for him. As unknown to Naruto, Asuya had truly developed a deep caring nature and feelings towards Naruto, something that was being taken note by Rias as well. As Naruto would continue in his service in the House of Grimmery, getting the packs and forming special contracts with other humans who required devil assistance, he was finding himself more acclimated to the devil lifestyle. Even more so as he would start earning a same keep similar to that of Akano and even Kiba, as his skills proved to be rather versatile and useful in this sort of field, finding finally a usefulness to his true calling. Among many of the ones that Naruto were sent to help, he would help a young girl who were trying to confess her feelings to a boy that she truly loved. This situation having a unique effect on Rias, Naruto noticing as he would ask her what were on her mind. Rias wouldn't say much, but she would simply marvel at the idea of true love. Naruto had never really thought much of love in the traditional sense. Not that he never had a crush on any girls in middle school or in preschool or anything, but it was just something that never truly crossed his mind. A couple of Valentines, a couple of confessions, but it never really went beyond that. Soon would come time for the House of Grimmery to go and select familiars. However, before they could meet with the familiar master, they would run into Sona, the school president, who Naruto would learn were a member of the House of Sea-Tree, one of the three great devil families, nobles and purebloods. Among the House of Sea-Tree, Naruto would also meet the rather arrogant Saji, who took up 4 pawn pieces. Sanji would be more than shocked to learn that Naruto took all 8, noting that for him to do so he must be seriously skilled. Rias and Sona would compete to see who would get to meet the familiar master, first competing in a game of 4-way tennis which ended in a draw, before eventually deciding to settle it with a game of team dodgeball. Naruto's skills proving to be more than useful in this regard, shocking the House of Sea-Tree when he revealed what he could do, creating his shadow clones to add to the advantage. This would prove to be a deadly skill to keep in mind, as many would believe that having Naruto by himself meant that Rias had no other pieces to use on the field. But Naruto was a walking whole pawn set, a rather dangerous weapon to use in combat, or in a game of dodgeball, the clones working together in unison and eventually giving Team Gremory the win. And thus, they would get to meet the familiar master first. The familiars being the tiny creatures that the devils would use to aid them in many of their assignments. Rias would show off her familiar, which was the bat that could turn into the Flyer Girl, the same one that Naruto had met before. He would meet the other ones as well. Koneko, who had a tiny cat, Akano, who had a tiny little devil itself, and Kiba, who had a nice puppy. Although they all had horns, they were still rather cuddly and unique in their own way. Naruto likening it to something like the summoning jutsu. Being confused on the topic, Naruto would briefly explain how the summoning jutsu worked in his world, noting how shinobi could summon animals and other beings and weapons to the battlefield. Although since he had been teleported to this world, there were no animals that he could form a contract with, so he had nothing that he could summon. Although now getting a familiar, he would have a chance to do so. As they would make their way to the domain of the familiar master, both Asuya and Naruto looking through the forest and the many creatures that lived in it. Asuya would come across a sprite dragon, who would take a liking to her, even shocking Naruto with lightning, giving Naruto a bad feeling when it came to lightning in general. He didn't really like the element or care for it very much. However, as he continued to look through the forest, he would see a tiny animal hidden under the bushes. As he went to see what it was, he would see what appeared to be a tiny fox. It was a female fox, and it had 9 tails. Naruto being shocked that he found such a creature, he would ask the familiar master if this were a 9-tailed fox spirit. He would explain that it were a baby yokai that he had found, abandoned in the city of Kyoto, taking it in and having it grow in the familiar's forest. He didn't think that anyone could form a pack with it. However, Rias would remark that Naruto and the fox-like being that he carried within him, the 9 tails, it would only seem natural that Naruto would take a familiar from a yokai. Naruto finding it to be rather cute and a lot more cooperative, unlike the certain 9 tails that dwelled within him. He would decide to form a pack with the female fox. Both Naruto and Rias getting a familiar of their own. Asuya would name hers Rasuto, as it would be a way to remind her of Naruto, the one who she truly had care and feelings for. And Naruto, after thinking it over, would decide to name his familiar Kushina. When asked why he chose to do so, Naruto would smile, as he would state that it would serve in memory of his fallen mother, who was the previous host of the 9-tailed fox. Rias thinking that it were a beautiful name, and that it was good for Naruto to do so in memory of his mother. As time would pass and Naruto would lie asleep, he would dream and have visions. Surrounded in a landscape of fire, he would see a tall and dark figure. The figure revealing himself to be the one that dwelled within his left hand. Naruto now being introduced to the second being that he were hosting within himself, the dragon that dwelled within his boosted gear. Later into the night, Naruto would be greeted by a visitor who would enter into his room via a magic circle. Not knowing who it would be, he would be shocked to see that it was Rias of all people, and he would see the serious look on her face as she would crawl into bed with him, attempting to give herself to him. This would be something that Naruto would not be expecting at all, Rias remarking that she couldn't think of anyone who would be a better choice than Naruto, only speaking that if she could sully herself, then she would no longer be attached to the fate that had been assigned to her. However, as she would continue to advance on Naruto, he would aggressively have to stop her, Rias wondering if Naruto thought that she wasn't good enough. However, Naruto would quickly reassure her that she were more than good enough. Her beauty was something to be admired, and it spoke for itself. However, he could tell that she were not in the right state of mind, and he would try to figure out what it was that was bothering her. However, before the two had a chance to continue speaking, another circle would appear within the room, and out from the teleportation spell would appear a woman in a maid's gown, with long silver hair. She would reveal herself as Graphia, serving as the servant to the Lord himself, and that she had come to pick up Rias Grimry and stop her from attempting to consummate herself to Naruto. As Rias would now go into the right state of mind, she would beg Naruto to forgive her for not acting in the right way. However, Naruto would only be more concerned about Rias and what could possibly trouble her to do such a thing. However, Rias would simply reassure Naruto that everything were fine and that she would have to leave now as there were things to be discussed, and that she would see him tomorrow. Naruto being left alone in his room, as now he were worried for whatever Rias was going through. The next day after school, Naruto, Kiba, and Asya would be making their way to the Occult Research Club. Naruto telling them what had happened the night before, and wondering just what it was that could have Rias in such a worried mood. Kiba would only think of one thing that could possibly have Rias this upset, and if he knew what it was, then it was going to be bad news. As everyone would be gathered within the room, along with Graphia, as Naruto had recognized her from the night before she even had a chance to speak, another magical circle would appear from the other side of the room, enveloped in flame, as a tall man with blonde hair and a red suit would reveal himself, speaking with grandiose and with such applause, referring to himself in the third person, addressing his name as Lord Riser Phoenix, of the House of Phoenix. Naruto being brought up to speed on the situation, it would be revealed to all of them that Riser had been promised Rias Grimry's hand in marriage. Naruto now understanding why Rias was so upset from the night before. He wasn't sure why, but the feeling that he got from Riser was one of arrogance and pride. He could tell from the way the man acted and the way that he carried himself that it was no wonder that Rias had no love for him. However, to be in a forced arranged marriage to this man would have to be something just out of a nightmare. Rias would try to explain to Riser that while she planned to give him the title that came with her name, her hand in marriage was something that she wanted to have for herself. However, Riser would only brush away her whims, advancing himself onto her more and more. This angering Naruto the most out of anyone within the room, as Riser would attempt to have his way with Rias, trying to bring her closer to him in a rather suggestive hug. Naruto would quickly appear before Rias' side, grabbing the arm of Riser Phoenix. Riser, angered that the young lowlife would have the audacity to grab his arm, Naruto would politely push him to the side. Riser's flame beginning to emit from his hands, truly feeling as if he had been disrespected by a low-class devil scum. Naruto would quickly reach into his coat pocket, pulling out the seal to reveal the kunai that he kept within, noting that he had no intentions of backing down from Riser as well. Before any moves could be made, Graphia would step forward. As the ultimate queen, she would not allow any violence to break out, causing both Riser and Naruto to stand down. She would explain that if communications were to fall during this meeting, that by order of Sir Zex himself, a raiding game were to take place between the House of Phoenix and the House of Grimmery. As Naruto would ask about what the raiding game was, it would be explained that it were a game played amongst noble devils to determine one's ranking among the classes. That was the reason for why the chess system had been assigned and what they were all based on. Noting that among the top ranked, Riser was considered a pro, and Rias, who had never even qualified to play, were a rookie at best. Riser would take exception to Naruto challenging him the way that he did, asking under what authority did he dare to step to the House of Phoenix, as Riser would reveal that unlike the ragtag team of devils that Rias associated herself with, he had a full set, revealing his entire house within the room. As he walked over to his queen, he would bring her into a kiss as his hands moved all over her body. Riser taunting Naruto, stating that he was aware of what Rias had tried to do, and was even more appalled that she would try to do it with someone the likes of him, noting that when he wins in the raiding game, Rias Grimmery would be all his, and he would have the pleasure of doing what he wanted to her, whenever and however he pleased. Naruto would be angered at these comments, as he would step forward to Riser. Riser being angered that the lowlife would have the audacity to do so once again, as Riser would stand and the two would meet face to face, Naruto not backing down an inch. Naruto would make it very clear that anything he did in the service of Rias Grimmery, even if it meant taking out trash like Riser, and that he had no problems facing his entire household. That if it came down to it, he didn't care how low he would have to go, even down to the lowest depths of the underworld. He would burn the entire House of Phoenix to its ground, and he would make sure that they would never rise from the ashes again. Many in the room would be shocked at Naruto's very audacity, believing that he had no idea who he was getting into a conflict with. As Rias Grimmery would go to stop Naruto, she couldn't help but feel emboldened by his words, seeing that he had no fear in his eyes, that there was no form of doubt within his words. She could not afford to waver. If Naruto were willing to fight so hard for her and her freedom, then she had to be willing to do the same. Rias would stand beside Naruto and make it very clear that her hand in marriage was hers and hers alone, and she would not give it to anyone, that she would gladly meet Riser in the raiding game, and that the House of Grimmery were going to win. With the match being accepted and the date being arranged, Riser would bid them farewell. However, as he left, he would leave one of his attendants behind, telling them to see what information they could gather, as he could tell deep within, Naruto was going to be a true threat, and true threats had to be taken with seriousness, no matter how foolish they were. In preparation for the raiding game, Rias along with the House of Grimmery would go on a training trip, heading to a secluded area that was owned by her family. She would use this area as a place for the House of Grimmery to train and build their strengths, as well as testing Naruto to see what he could truly do, as well as getting a hold of that boosted gear of his. When it came to the many aspects of Naruto's abilities, he proved to be rather formidable in his own ways, Naruto being happy that he finally had people that he could truly test his skills against. When it came to blade practice, Naruto's kunai work was paralleled to Kiba in his sword play, the two matching each other, although Kiba's natural ability with the knight gave him the slight edge in terms of speed. Naruto was certainly not lacking, keeping the young blonde-haired boy on his toes as they would battle all throughout the squares. When it came to matching his ninjutsu to magic, Akano would be a good test for him, sending out her own torrents of lightning and various lightning-based attacks. Naruto's wind ninjutsu proved to be a good counter to her, especially the wind-style wind dragon jutsu, as well as the air bullet. He would also practice in his taijutsu form, practicing and sparring in one-on-one against the Rook of the House of Grimmery and Konako. Konako's hits landed pretty heavily. Naruto would learn the hard way not to underestimate his opponents. Konako's smaller size and stature made it a lot easier for her to dodge a lot of Naruto's attacks, countering with her own, as they were haymakers and devastating when landed. This would give Naruto a good sense of what the Rook could do, as he was getting experience in battling the different pieces, not knowing who he would have to face during the raiding game. However, finally, the part that would prove to be the hardest was getting a hold of his boosted gear, seeing how it worked and just how far he could amplify his power. He could go within 12 boosts before hitting his upper limit. However, the boost from the powers proved to be exhilarating, boosting his overall stats and abilities in every form. Learning how to harness the boosted gear's power, he was able to develop the dragon shot itself. Taking the form of wind, he would use the boosted gear to strengthen his wind-style ninjutsu, proving to increase the lethality of the blows tenfold, making it truly devastating before hitting the upper limits and then entering into its reset. He would learn that his clones could not use the boosted gear as well, but it would be just him himself. However, he could transfer the power to the other clones, which could come in handy, as well as learning to transfer the power to the other members of the House of Grimmery as well. And Asya would prove to be useful in explaining various tools that could be used against high-class devils, such as holy water and holy objects. Although since they were all devils themselves, they would not be able to use any of them in battle, but the information would be good to know. And finally, Rias would explain the overall situation as to why she had been forced into the arranged marriage, noting that after the Great War, many of the numbers amongst the angels, the fallen angels, and even the devils had all taken a massive hit, and that purebloods breeding with one another were a top priority, and that out of the 72 pillars that had remained, only 3 had managed to survive from the last Great War: the House of Sea-Tree, the House of Grimmery, and, finally, the House of Phoenix. However, with her brother Serzex now taking the role as the King Lucifer, the Devil King of the Underworld, the title of the House of Grimmery now fell to her, and thus was a title that was coveted by many others, noting that Riser was the top candidate in the selection from among her brother and her father. As the training was slowly coming to an end, and only a day awaited until the raiding game, as Naruto had wrapped up a late night worth of training on his own, making his way back into the mansion that they were using as their temporary residence, he would come across Rias Grimmery as the two would be alone in the halls, Rias calling him out to the balcony so that they could have a private talk. Rias would ask Naruto if he were happy that he had been made a devil, and asked if he had any regrets in getting into this life. She would then confess something that she had had on her heart for a while, not knowing how Naruto would take it, but feeling as though this might be the last time that they would get to speak. She would have to tell him the truth. Truthfully, despite the injuries that he had taken from his fight with Rainier in the Legion of Fallen Angels. There was a small chance that he could have survived. His regenerative abilities were pretty high compared to that of the average human, most likely from his lineage. And while the damage that he had taken was severe and life-threatening, there was no guarantee that he had to be made a devil in order to survive the assault. It might have taken much longer, and the process might have been much slower, but he could have probably recovered within time. Whether if he would have been 100% of who he used to be, that would have been another story. However, she never asked Naruto's permission to be turned into a devil, instead taking it upon herself to add him to her household. She wasn't entirely sure why, but when Naruto first came to their school, she had seen him from a distance and felt as there was something unique about him, something that she couldn't quite put into words. But up until now, the opportunity never came for the two of them to speak face to face. Although now, with all of the things that happened between them, it felt as though it were only right that she tell him the truth, knowing that he might hate her for it, knowing that she probably robbed him of his chance at a normal life. However, Naruto would quickly stop her, telling her that the normal life was never something he truly wanted. Maybe he could have gotten a regular house job, gone to college, and done the same old. And sure, maybe that was the life that would have been fine for him. But he couldn't admit that having been given the role of a devil was the worst thing in the world. In fact, he would have to admit that his life had become a lot more interesting for it. And even now, he had a chance to bring back what had been lost, knowing full well that he was the last shinobi of his world. This was probably something that he was meant to do, something that only he could do. He would tell Rias that she did not have to worry, that she was not going to lose her chance at love, that she would get an opportunity as long as he were fighting by her side. He would promise not to let anything happen to her. Rias would thank Naruto, knowing that for a long time, she had known that her fate was never her own, and that amongst many of the underworld, she was never viewed as Rias Grimmery, only as the next head of the House of Grimmery. She knew very well that the only reason why any man ever truly vied for her attention was simply for the title and the status that their marriage could give them. But even still, the idea of marrying for love was something that she wanted to keep, noting Naruto's story of his parents and how they met. Naruto would be a bit bashful, thinking that Rias would remember something like that out of everything else he had told her. But Rias would remark that the story between his father and mother was something of true beauty. The idea of a young boy going to save a girl in a new and strange land, of not abandoning her like all the others had, of truly standing by her and loving her for who she was, despite what she carried within. It was something that she genuinely admired, and something that she would want for herself. As Naruto looked at Rias under the moonlight, Rias wondering why Naruto was staring for so long, he would blabble on and admit that he kind of got distracted. When Rias asked what it was that was distracting him, he would just simply play it off, stating that it was nothing serious. Rias genuinely being curious as to what Naruto was so distracted by. However, Naruto would not want to tell her now, believing that it probably wasn't anything all that serious and she would only laugh at him. But nonetheless, Rias would bid Naruto a good night, giving him a kiss on the cheek as they would go to sleep, preparing for the next night's raiding game and all that was in store for them. The next night, Naruto as well as the House of Grimmery would meet at the Occult Research Club, awaiting for the time of the raiding game to begin. Before it started, Sona of the House of Sea Tree would wish them good luck, stating that she and Tsubaki, the vice president, and her assistant, would be doing commentary for the rating game. As it would begin, Grayfield would explain the overall rules, knowing that the space that they would be competing in would be in another dimension. However, the layout of the land would be similar to the school that they were already in, noting that Rias's home base would be the Occult Research Club, and that Riser's home base would be the principal's office, noting that the only way to win the game was to defeat your king's pieces and put them into checkmate, and that pawns could only promote themselves within the enemy's home base. Riser would send his plans into motion, making sure that everything was set. The rules had already been given ahead of time for Naruto, as he was a special case in the matter, Riser having an extensive archive on Naruto and his abilities, noting what he could do, and he had a special weapon put into place just to neutralize the dragon threat. Rias would send her plan into motion, knowing that she couldn't afford to waste the opportunity that Naruto's power gave them. She would send Kiba and Koneko, along with 2 Naruto clones, to set traps in the forest. Akano would go to place illusion spells, along with another Naruto for protection, while Rias, Asuya, and the original Naruto would stay in the base and wait for further orders, as the night was still young and there were many preparations that needed to be made. Once everything was arranged, they would soon turn their attention to the gymnasium, noting that that was the midway point between the 2 bases, and whoever could secure the gymnasium first would gain the upper hand in the rating game. As Koneko were preparing to enter into the gym, Rias would have Naruto leave 2 more of his clones with she and Asuya, as he would gain 1 more from the clone that was already with Koneko, as they would go and secure the gym. Wishing them good luck, Naruto would head out to meet with Koneko, as the 2 would head to the gym, being intercepted by Riser's group, as the first battle in the rating game would ensue. Coming into contact with Riser's 1 rook and 3 pawns, Koneko would test her strength against the rook, leaving the 3 pawns to Naruto, as they would all lunge at him from different sides. Naruto would take the easy way, allowing them to come and draw the battle out to him, as he would test their abilities to see what they could do, fending them off one by one, not making any clones as he didn't feel there were a need to, despite the fact that the 3 pawns were rather strong in their own right and were able to push Naruto for quite a bit. However, he would eventually take them all out effortlessly, along with Koneko, who would make quick work of the rook that she had done battle with, leaving the gym as they left their opponent's lane, as Akano would send out a torrent of lightning, vaporizing them all and taking them out of the battle instantly. As Naruto and Koneko would be given their further orders, they would go to rendezvous with Kiba, who was also dealing with a small platoon of Riser's forces within the forest itself, taking them out quickly as they were going to make their second push towards the principal's office. However, as they were continuing their advancement, Naruto, running with Koneko, as well as one of his clones that were well ahead of him, a large blast would come from the sky, faster than Naruto or Koneko could have evaded. The Naruto clone trying his best to shield Koneko, however the 2 would be taken out in the assault, Naruto losing 1 clone, and Koneko being defeated as well, as the Queen of Riser would hover above them, with a mocking grin on her face, noting that taking out Naruto was a lot easier than she thought it would be. As Kiba would arrive as well, Akano would then show up to take the Queen one-on-one, telling Naruto and Kiba to focus on the remaining opponents, and that they should leave the Queen to her. As they would go to engage in their own battle, Rias and Asuya, as well as the 2 Naruto clones that Rias had left behind in order to guard them, would be making their push towards Riser's base, as the original Naruto and Kiba would stand side by side to do battle with the remaining pieces on Riser's board. Kiba would take the knight, as they would engage in a battle of swordplay and speed, while Naruto would deal with the remaining rook, as well as the two bishops and the three pawns. One of the bishops being revealed to be Ravel Phoenix, the sister of Riser Phoenix, who would speak in a mocking and condescending tone to Naruto, stating that no matter how skilled or tricky he might be, they had plans in motion, and they were more than ready to take him down. Naruto taking this as a challenge, as he would go face to face with the rook and the remaining pieces on Riser's board, doing battle with them and creating his clones to act as diversions, as they would move as one and in perfect coordination, something that the pieces had not intended for, as it would seem as Naruto were gaining the upper hand against them. As the battle would continue and rage on, Akeno would be taken out by the Queen, who would ultimately use her trump card to gain the advantage on a tired Akeno, revealing that they were in use of the Phoenix Tears, a special item that could revive anyone in battle. It would soon be revealed that all the members of the House of Phoenix had been given supplies of Phoenix Tears, and were basically able to return again, living up to their moniker as the Phoenix that would rise from the ashes. As Naruto and Kiba soon saw that they were backed within a hole, Kiba would try to hold the front lines. However, it would not last for long, as soon he would be taken out by the Queen as well. As Naruto could see Rias fighting on top of the roof, Asuya by her side as she were going up against Riser, he would hear over the loudspeaker that two more of his pawns had been taken out, as well as Kiba being defeated as well, noting that they had now lost even more of their valuable assets, and Naruto was now down to only 3 more clones. He knew that he would have to fight smarter if he were going to take them out, as Riser's whole team had now been reassembled, his queen leading the charge against Naruto, but Naruto, boosting himself with the boosted gear, would increase his strength and overall speed, as he went through defeating them as quickly as possible. However, something seemed to be off with what they were doing. A few times, a few of the members of the House of Riser would touch Naruto before being taken out. Of course, he had no idea what were going on, or what trickery were up their sleeves. But eventually, Naruto would be able to battle through the entire force, until eventually he would reconvene with Rias and Asuya on top of the school building, as they would come face to face with Riser and his queen. Naruto would create his clones, or what he had remaining, as the 4 Narutos would stand face to face with Riser, remarking that now he was going to meet his end. However, before Naruto could even land another attack, Riser would tell his queen to enact the plan that had been given to her. As she would do so, multiple tiny magical circles would appear all over the Naruto's bodies, Naruto wondering what were going on. Riser would remark that Naruto should have been more careful and not let himself be touched so recklessly, as from every circle, a small beam of light would shoot out, blasting the Narutos all over. The original Naruto, feeling his body being pierced multiple times by small beams of light, feeling as if his body had been suicided by poison itself, as he would fall to the ground on one knee, feeling as if his whole body were on fire. Riser would reveal his plan from the beginning. Noting that Naruto could be a potential threat, he had to come up with a way to take out Naruto in one fell swoop, or at the very least reduce his number of clones. It took a lot of work, and a lot of bloodshed were lost for him to receive such a technique. But he had managed to capture small beams of light from those who were able to use them, the one weakness of all devils. As this was the first time that it had ever been used, it was not ruled as an illegal weapon, although it would be noted that it would probably be the last time that it would ever be used. Riser did not care in this matter, knowing that the technique was only meant to be a one-time thing anyway, and that his main focus was to remove Naruto from the board. As the clones would all disappear and only the original Naruto would remain, his boosted gear working overtime to boost his power, as well as whatever regenerative abilities that he had left within himself, keeping him alive as Naruto would stand back to his feet, his arms and legs and even some of his chest riddled with the holes from the beams of light that had been shot through them. Asuya would attempt to heal Naruto, but before she could get any closer, Riser's queen would shoot out a blast towards her, keeping her and Rias at bay, now leaving the injured Naruto to battle with Riser by himself. Naruto would force his boosted gear to work overtime, putting everything that he had before it would time out. Charging what energy he had left, he would take hold of it as he would charge towards Riser, the two engaging in combat. Despite Naruto's weakened state, he would prove to be more than formidable and hard to defeat, pushing Riser to his upper limits, as even he had to admit that Naruto had tenacity. However, tenacity would only get Naruto so far, and soon, Naruto would feel his body reaching its absolute limit. Even Kurama could feel the damage that had been done to his body, and it made it hard for him to transfer any of his chakra to keep Naruto afloat. It seemed as though they were truly done for, as Riser would now gain the upper hand in battle, beating down Naruto mercilessly over and over again. As Naruto would throw his kunai all around the arena, as he only had a limit of 10, he would use the remaining parts of his chakra to use the teleportation jutsu, moving out of the way of many of Riser's assaults, as well as trying to get close enough to land a hit on Riser himself. As Naruto would get close enough, Riser would send out a large wave of fire, blowing and incinerating all of Naruto's kunai and destroying them to dust, as the flames of the immortal phoenix could burn through just about anything. As Naruto only had one more remaining, he would rush forward towards Riser, as he would try to land a single punch. Feeling his body giving out, Riser would catch his wrist, grabbing it in his hands as he would snap it. As he broke Naruto's wrist, and Naruto would feel the pain shooting throughout his entire body, Riser would begin to beat down on him mercilessly, noting that despite all of his tricks, they were not going to get him any farther here. In his last act of defiance, Naruto would send his kunai into his mouth, as he would slash at Riser's face, leaving a single cut, as a small trail of blood would leave his face. Riser now being truly pissed at what had happened, he would now want to leave no mercy when it came to Naruto, as he would begin his beatdown on the young boy. Rias and Asuya looking on in horror. Naruto would still stand on his feet, not giving in an inch, as he did not plan to stop. He couldn't stop. He had made a promise to Rias that he was going to win. He was going to see this through to the end, even if it killed him. And Riser was just the man to do the killing, as he would mock Naruto for trying to defy fate, for trying to defy his superiors. He was going to pay the ultimate price with his life. As Naruto would sit on one knee, completely battered and beaten to the ground, Riser would lift him up by only his hair, as Naruto looked into his eyes defiantly. Riser would raise his fist, imbuing it with every bit of the Phoenix flame, as he would prepare to deliver the final blow, as he would plunge his fist, aiming it directly towards Naruto's heart, to burn and send him away to the depths of hell itself. Before the attack could even land fully, Rias would jump into Riser's arms, pushing him away and stopping his attack, as Naruto would fall to the ground, Rias wrapping herself all around him, holding him close, and even pulling him into a kiss. Something that Riser was not even expecting, but something that he were truly pleasant for. As Riser would hold Rias close, not letting her go at all, Rias would shed tears as she would beg Riser to stop, begging him not to kill Naruto, stating that she had given up and that he had won. Riser would claim his victory as he looked down upon the injured and beaten Naruto, as his eyes would slowly begin to close and he would fade into black. Deep within Naruto's subconscious, he would hear the voice of the dragon, as he would speak to Naruto to rise and to not fall so humbly, or the White One would laugh. As Naruto would ask who the White One was, the voice would only speak, stating that he would one day have to stand on the battlefield against the White One himself, and on that day, he cannot afford to fail. As Naruto would ask who the voice was that was speaking to him, it would reveal himself to be none other than Dreg, the Welsh dragon, the balance breaker, the one who resided in Naruto's left hand. However, Dreg would also have choice words for his fellow roommate, referring to Kurama, who had not wanted to speak since the battle. Kurama instead being irritated to Naruto for falling for such a cheap trick, and Naruto angered at Kurama. Dreg would stop the two of them from bickering, explaining that if the two of them had learned to work together long ago, they could have avoided this situation, noting that Kurama were almost akin to himself, noting that the two of them should be allies and not fighting one another. However, Kurama would yell at Dreg, stating that he had no clue what he had gone through for years, knowing that he had been nothing more but a caged beast, and that he had no intentions on working with Naruto. And Naruto for the most part were fine with that decision, stating that Kurama had been nothing but a burden to him his whole life. However, Dreg would stop their arguing once more, knowing that the two of them could be rather stubborn with one another, and that if they continued on down this path, then they were all going to die a rather short and pathetic death, noting that if it weren't for the interference of that girl, they might not be alive now. This snapping Naruto wide awake as he would be back in his room, his body bandaged, as he looked to see that it had already been nightfall. Within his room, Grafia would appear as well, telling him what had happened and how Rias had stopped the fight. Naruto noting that he should have been able to keep going, and Grafia would remark that he had, that even while he were unconscious, his body seemed to move on its own, and that it was only thanks to Rias that he had been able to survive. She would tell Naruto not to feel bad, noting that, for a beginner, he had truly fought remarkably, knowing that Lord Riser's technique was now forbidden in all raiding games, knowing full well that a weapon of light could be catastrophic to any devil, and that for him to use such a tactic could have potentially put the life of Rias Grimry, as well as her servants, in harm's way, something that was truly dishonorable. However, Naruto would still hold the blame onto himself, knowing that if he had only been stronger, if he had only fought harder, if he had only been better, then Rias would not have suffered this fate. However, Grayfield would remark that this was her fate from the beginning, that this raiding game were pretty much pointless, that she had no chance in winning, but even still, she were given the opportunity to fight fate. But sometimes, fate cannot be fought, and sometimes, one must merely bow to the road that has been given to them. However, Naruto would not want to accept that, noting that if there were any way to fight fate, then he would be the one to do so. That his whole life had been fighting fate, and that now was not the time for him to stop. He didn't know how, but some way, he was going to save her. Grayfia, admiring Naruto's determination, she would give him a single piece of paper that would hold a magical seal on it, stating that Rias was currently in the underworld at an engagement party, and that if he truly wanted to save her, then he were going to have to go and fight for her. As Grayfia would bid Naruto a farewell, Asuya would enter into the room, checking on him to see if he were alright. Naruto remarking that he were fine for the most part, though a bit banged up. Asuya would say that she were sorry and that she wished she could have done more. But Naruto would assure her that everything were fine, but that for now, his main focus was saving Rias. That was the only thing that he wanted to do. However, before he left, he had something that he needed to ask Asuya. He needed to borrow something from her. As Asuya would leave to get the item that he had requested, Naruto would speak with Dreg, stating that they needed to make a deal, and fast. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Rias Grimry would be dressed in a wedding gown, as Riser had personally demanded it, as he wanted to show off his prized new wife to the royals of the underworld, in showing of the unison that was to be between the House of Grimmery and the House of Phoenix. Among many of the party guests would be the other members of Rias' household, as Kiba, Koneko, and Akano would be speaking politely to the guests. They too felt a bit of anger and bitterness towards the situation, especially in learning of what Riser had done, using a weapon that had now been deemed illegal, just to gain the cheap upper hand, noting that if Naruto had been able to fight at full strength, maybe they could have had a chance. But amongst the others, it would only be seen that a win was a win, as even Riser's sister Ravel would gloat about their victory, noting that the House of Grimmery never stood a chance. As the party would get underway and Riser would speak out to the crowd, unveiling Rias to his guest, the doors would burst open, as 8 shadows would move quickly throughout the room, taking out the guards that had been posted, before all 8 of them would appear in front of Riser. Riser being angered at someone for daring to disrupt this sacred of occasions, as it would be revealed to be Naruto himself. As the clones would all disappear back into the original Naruto, he would hold his kunai and point it straight towards Riser, telling him to back away from Rias. As more guards would enter into the room, Akeno, Kiba, and Koneko would aid Naruto in defeating them, noting that they were going to have Naruto's back until the very end. As Riser would start to emit flames from his hand, noting that he should have killed Naruto when he had the chance. Naruto would only retort that that would be his mistake, and that they were going to settle things here and now. However, before the battle could get underway, the sound of another voice would enter into the room. As everyone would turn, it would be none other than the great Devil King himself, Sir Lucifer, Sir Zex. As Naruto would see that Rias' brother had now come to the party, he would wonder what this would mean for him, as well as the fate of Rias. As Riser would also be puzzled at the arrival of the great Devil King, Sir Zex would remark that many in the underworld were very underwhelmed with Riser's performance, and the use of such an obscene weapon as that of the light spears, a known weapon to all devils and something that not even they of the higher class can counter. He would note that it was rather distasteful to use such a thing in something as sacred as a raiding game. However, Riser would remark that in the end it was only the results that mattered. But even still, Sir Zex wanted to give Naruto another chance, and he believed that at such an event as this, it would need a little flair. And as such, he proposed a battle between Naruto and Riser, Dragon versus Phoenix. Naruto would be more than eager to take Sir Zex up on that offer, and Riser, while he were not in the mood, would be happy to finally rid himself of the low-class devil scum. As they would be sent to an arena, Sir Zex would ask Naruto what his prize would be if he won. Many amongst the crowd speaking and murmuring amongst themselves, noting that someone of a low rank as Naruto could not possibly receive such a prize. However, Sir Zex would quiet them, noting that as his king, he had asked this of Naruto, and that anything that Naruto wanted he would be given, whether it be title, of fame, women, anything that his heart's desired. But Naruto would only desire one thing, and that would be for Rias to be free to choose her own hand in marriage. And with that, the stage had now been set for the final battle to begin, as Naruto would come face to face with Lord Riser Phoenix. As the battle would get underway, Naruto would create multiple shadow clones, all 7 of them, as they would launch themselves towards Riser, who would shoot out his flames in order to keep them at bay, as the original Naruto would enter into his balance breaker scale mail. Using the temporary boost that he had been given by Dreg, the clones would act as distractions just long enough for Naruto to enter into the fight. As the two would engage each other in combat, Naruto's prowess in taijutsu being on full form, as even Riser, a master in his own skill in the Phoenix style of hand-to-hand combat, would have to counter Naruto in the styles that he had learned from his years of hard work and training. Noting that Naruto only had the 10 count, he would have to make each blow land and each one count, as Riser would counter with his own strikes, the two gaining the upper hand over one another slowly. As Naruto's left fist would connect more and more to Riser, Riser could feel more damage that was being taken. He wondered just what it was that was giving Naruto such power, before seeing that Naruto carried a holy cross in his hand. Noting that no devil could be able to hold one, Naruto would only smirk, stating that he could do so, and that his left hand was no longer his own to begin with. Riser now realizing that Naruto had sold his left arm to the dragon within him. He would yell at Naruto obscenely, noting that he could now never have such a normal life. But Naruto were fine with such a deal, as he noted he had always carried demons within him, and now this was no different. He were willing to give whatever it took to free Rias, and he was never going to lose to someone like him. As Naruto would continue on in his attacks, hoping to land the final assault and end the battle once and for all, he would lose the count of 10 as the scale mail would disappear. Now with no defense, Riser's attacks would start to do even more damage. Naruto now being left to only the skills that had brought him to this world. Riser would remark that he was going to destroy Naruto once and for all. Naruto's kunais had all been destroyed from the previous raiding game, and he only had one left. But even still, he knew that he had one last trick up his sleeve. From his last experience in his fight with Rasengan, he thought that he had one more jutsu that could turn the tide of this fight. However, in order to do so, he would need the assistance of the nine-tailed fox. As he would look into his subconscious, he would look to Kurama, meeting him in the astral plane, as the fox stood on the other side of the cage, looking down to the young Naruto. He would ask him what did he want. Naruto would make it very clear that this fight had everything riding on it, and as much as the two could not stand one another, they had enough pride to know that they were not going to lose. That if Kurama had any pride in himself as the greatest of the tailed beast, then he would not allow his Jinchuriki to lose in this fight. Playing on Kurama's own pride, the fox would turn to Naruto, stating that that was a cheap trick to play. However, Naruto would simply smile and look back towards Kurama, knowing that they didn't have to be friends, and he wasn't asking for his full power. He just needed enough to fulfill his final act. That was all he required. With that, Kurama would allow Naruto a small portion of his chakra. When he asked if Naruto were going to open the cage, Naruto would simply smile back to the fox and tell him absolutely not, that they weren't there yet in terms of their relationship. Kurama remarking that this was no relationship, this were merely a business transaction. Kurama did not want to die, and Naruto needed to win if he were going to save that girl. With the two having a mutual understanding, Naruto would bid Kurama farewell, as he would enter back into the fight. He now had the power that he needed, as his body would take on the aura of the nine-tailed fox, but now in a more controlled state. As the spectators would look on, wondering what this new and unbridled power was, Naruto's aura would turn into a dark red, as his entire body would be surrounded in a cloak similar to that of a fox, as a single tail would emerge behind him. Naruto's eyes would be ablaze, as he would rush towards Lord Riser Phoenix, creating two shadow clones that would move to the right and to the left. They would each shoot out a Uzumaki chakra chain, binding his arms and holding him in place. As Naruto would jump into the air, his hand now enshrined with the boosted gear, he would assimilate and absorb the holy powers of the cross within him. As he did so, he would start to infuse the power of the cross with that of his own chakra. Soon forming within his hand would be the Rasengan. However, this would be different from the Rasengan that he used against Rainier. This Rasengan would change its color, not to red, but to a pure and blinding white. And around the Rasengan, a light veil of a ring, forming as if he were holding the planet Saturn within his hands. A golden circle would envelop around the Rasengan. Riser looking on in horror to see that Naruto were combining his power along with that of the Holy Cross, creating something that no devil, not even himself, were able to tank. As the two Narutos held Riser in place, Naruto would stand across from him as he would begin to build speed, using all of the power that Kurama were able to give him. In his one-tails cloak state, he would move in a blinding flash, running straight towards Riser. With no choice, Riser would use his two wings to shoot out large walls of flame, burning away at the two clones, causing them to disappear, as now Naruto were aiming directly at his chest. Riser would put both his hands together and conjure every bit of the Phoenix fire within him, yelling that Naruto was going to die and that this was going to be the end of him. As he would create the Spear of Phoenix, a large spiraling torrent of fire would be shot straight towards Naruto, as Naruto's Rasengan were stretched out. It would appear as if the two attacks were going to collide with one another. However, in the last moment, Naruto would throw the single kunai that he carried with him, throwing it directly at Riser, who would move his head to the side to dodge the attack, thinking that Naruto had missed. However, he had not. Remembering what Naruto's attacks were and what he could do, and noting that that was the same kunai that he used with his little teleportation technique, Riser's eyes would open wide. The look of fear and shock on his face as he realized what had happened. However, before he could turn around to block the attack, Naruto had already appeared behind him, as he would yell out, "Flying Raijin, Level 2, Holy Rasengan," as the Rasengan would smash into Riser's back, slamming him straight into the ground as the power of the Holy Cross emanated within his jutsu, zapping Riser of his strength as he would now be left in a crater, barely able to move, his body and mind in a complete and total wreck. Even if he were immortal, his mental state was not, and it was now on the verge of ruin, as Riser could hardly get to his feet. As Naruto would stand above him, his single kunai pointed directly at his throat. His sister Ravel Phoenix would enter into the battlefield, rushing over to her brother as she would throw her arms around him, telling Naruto not to hurt him. However, Naruto would warn her to move out of the way, stating that he were the victor in this fight, and he had won. With that, the battle would be over, and Sir Zex would declare Naruto the winner. As the dimensional battleground would begin to fade, Naruto would start to fall within the sky, being extremely tired from the fight and feeling as if he had truly overworked himself, as his body had not completely healed from his last battle, and now he had pushed himself to the limits once again, using the overbooster, as well as drawing on some of Kurama's chakra. He would feel as if he couldn't stop himself from falling. However, before he hit the ground, he would be saved by Rias Grimmery, who would come swooping in to pick him up, holding him close to her, as tears flowed from her eyes as she could not stop thanking Naruto for all that he had done for her. As she held Naruto close and landed on the ground safely, they would meet with the other members of the House of Grimmery, who would congratulate Naruto on his victory, as they would form a griffin that would be made just for them to fly home on. Naruto would be given the honor of flying back with Rias. Naruto getting his bearings together as he would climb aboard, holding Rias close in hand, noting that if he didn't die and fall off of that thing, that he would see them the next day. With that, Naruto and Rias would fly into the night, Sir Zex looking on from the engagement hall along with Graphia, remarking that it were truly a miracle that the Red Dragon were finally on their side, even if the curse of the Welsh Dragon would fall upon them, noting that Naruto were truly an amazing young boy, and that his strength were remarkable. If he continued on his path, he would make a potentially great Devil King in no time. As Naruto and Rias would fly, looking upon the starry sky, Rias would hold onto Naruto's arm that had now been turned into that of the dragon, knowing that he had given up his arm to save her, and yet put himself through more pain. However, Naruto would only brush it off, telling her that he would have given anything if it meant that he could save her once again, and to see that smile on her face one more time. As the two were left awestruck and not sure of what to say, Naruto would decide that since everything seemed to be fine now, he could tell her what he were thinking that night. Rias almost forgetting entirely, but now being curious to know what Naruto had been thinking. Naruto would explain that he had been distracted by Rias' beauty, knowing that her red hair, the way it looked in the moonlight, it were truly beautiful and breathtaking, and that it was something that his eyes could never get enough of for some reason. As the two were arm in arm, the scene could almost be similar to that of a young blonde-haired boy who had saved a red-headed girl long ago in the village hidden in the leaves, as he carried her to safety. The scene almost being replayed in this exact moment, as Rias would pull Naruto into a kiss. Naruto's first, but surely not his last. As the two would continue their kiss into the night, as the crimson-haired Princess of Ruin and the Red Dragon Emperor had finally been reunited as one, it seemed as though there would never be a better duo than the one that had been formed between them. Naruto did not serve Rias Grimmery out of necessity, or for title, or for fame. He did what he did only because he truly felt that it was what he was meant to do, that his purpose, above all else, was to keep that beautiful smile on her face. It was a smile that was worth defending, and even more so a smile that was worth dying for. Life would seemingly return back to normal for Naruto, or at least as normal as life can be when you're a devil. Of course, there were many other forces out there for him to face, and he had not lost sight of the goals that he had made for himself. That he would restore the shinobi world back to its prominence, and that he would make the title of Hokage mean something, even if it meant he would have to take the title of Devil King. But no matter what Naruto did, he knew that in his journey he was not alone, for he had many friends that would stand by his side. As Naruto looked forward into the future and whatever life had to throw his way, he knew that he could conquer it all. He would get a mastery over the power within him, the Welsh dragon and the nine-tailed fox, with Naruto making the threefold cord. They were now the Crimson Trinity. This concludes What If Naruto Was in High School DxD Season 1 Part 3, the finale. Again, thank you all for listening to this story. Thank you for being a part of the reboot of this series. Really means a lot to me, and I'm looking really forward to revamping this series and taking it in a new direction. As well as all my other work here on Power Core Productions and Podcastings, it really means a lot for you guys to support me in my endeavors. It means a lot. Like I always say, you guys make the channel grow, you make the core grow. I cannot do it without you guys and your support. It means a lot to me. So I hope that I can continue to put out good content for you guys, and stay tuned for everything that is to come now and in the future. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that's Power Core Productions and Podcastings. But that's going to do it for the end of this video. I'm Javon Harrington of Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.